the reason I think that the West is dead, and in many ways irrecoverable in the form that we used to recognize it, is because Christianity itself, the West is definitively post-Christian with the sole exception of some places in America. In Europe, if you look at the latest polls for most Western European countries, like I remember even the stats in Italy for regular church attendance shocked me. It was something like 17%. I already told you the numbers for Canada, somewhere around 11%. And what's really interesting about the way that this has changed is that it's not just that the West is no longer Christian, is that it has no idea what Christianity actually taught. So the reason Christianity can be caricatured so effectively by progressives is because people are not aware of the basic stories of Christianity. They're not aware of the Bible stories. Again, a quarter of UK millennials didn't even know who the baby in the manger was. Most of them have no idea what the Trinity means. Most of them don't even know what the essence of the gospel story is.
Even basic ascetical differences between Protestants and Catholics are misunderstood.
Yeah.
So if they need to demonize someone, they'll give him a collar.
Yes.
But he'll be Protestant maybe, or if they've got the angry old church lady who's very clearly a Protestant fundamentalist, she's wearing a medal of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Yeah. It's just, you're part of that group.
Yeah.
And you guys are all very bad. And so that's what I do find different about the United States is that Christianity is still part of the public discourse, and you still have politicians that speak clearly into microphones on CNN shows about their Christian beliefs, whereas you don't have that in most other places. But I think that once you're a couple of generations away from it, you start to realize the extent to which it was the cohesion that allowed our civilization to actually exist. And the best piece of evidence for this, interestingly, is I was a huge Christopher Hitchens fan in university, not because I agreed with him on anything, but because his responses were just phenomenal. And his debates were awesome to watch, right? But I remember thinking in college that the big debates of the next decade were going to be on the historicity of the resurrection and debates on the specifics of Christian history. Like, can we be more nuanced about the Crusades, perhaps? Or, you heard all the arguments. The new atheists now have been replaced by atheists that have this nostalgia for Christianity that they're almost embarrassed about. So Douglas Murray.
Yes, that's who I was just thinking of.
Well, so I interviewed him and I actually asked him, do you think that the Christian conception of human rights, the idea of the sanctity of human life, will survive into the post-Christian era? And he says, I don't think so, and it terrifies me. You wrote a few years ago, and you were writing about our society's increasing apathy. It was the particular issue you were writing about, I believe, was Kermit Gosnell. And you wrote this, the more atheists think on these things, the more we may have to accept that the concept of the sanctity of human life is a Judeo-Christian notion which might very easily not survive Judeo-Christian civilization. Those who do not believe in God and who stare over that cliff may realize that only three options remain open to us. The first option is to fall into the furnace. Another is to work furiously to nail down an atheist version of the sanctity of the individual. And if that does not work, then there is only one other place to go, which is back to faith, whether we like it or not. Sir Roger Scruton never fully managed to embrace Christianity, but started going back to church. When they asked him why, he said, I'm hoping practice makes perfect. Charles Murray, who's one of the famous American philosophers who wrote The Bell Curve and a number of other books, I interviewed him for the National Review, and he's an agnostic, but he told me that barring a religious revival, America will go the way of Europe and die. Neil Ferguson, who's probably one of the most famous historians, he's married to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and he's written The Looming Tower, History of Money, all sorts of fascinating books. He's recently stated as well that without Christianity as the glue that binds civilization together, he thinks it'll all be over. And he actually said to me, he's like, I think people should go back to church. Like, you really need to go back to church because we're seeing what happens when nobody goes to church. And this is not something that we can sustain over the long haul. And then, of course, we got Richard Dawkins, who, it's kind of like watching the snake choke on its own tail, right? You've got Richard Dawkins, who's now, a culture warrior over transgender pronouns and things like that.
There are two sexes. You can talk about gender if you wish, and that's a subjective. I'm not.
But when people say there are 100 genders, for example.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. As a biologist, there are two sexes, and that's all there is to it.
Even J.K. Rowling, right? Did you see the joke about Harry Potter? Like, what's the difference between right-wing literature and left-wing literature? It's like 2 decades, right? Like, everybody said, don't read Harry Potter, and now everybody's like, and now she's a conservative.
Yeah.
So I think most interesting is all these really intelligent atheists who have spent a couple of decades trying to figure out where we're headed and looked up and been like, oh boy,
Yeah.
Like, this is not going to be good. And it's because you can't undo the sexual revolution, and that's kind of shredded the moral fabric.
What's sad about Murray is that he seems to realize that we need Christianity to survive, but that he can't find it within him to accept Christianity. And so it sounds like, unless I'm misunderstanding him, that it would be good for society if we accept a fiction, but that a lot of people just can't do that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I'll do a little bit of dangerous psychoanalysis because I've watched a lot of his interviews because I thought his books, the Strange Death of the West, Madness of Crowds, were fascinating books. But I don't think it's insignificant that Douglas Murray is gay and apparently has had a long-standing partner. And he's defended very vociferously the idea that homosexual love is just as valid as heterosexual love and things like that. Like, I don't think it's insignificant that he believes that firmly. It's shaped who he is, and at the same time, Christianity. He's too clear-minded to be an Episcopalian, right? I think he's too intellectually honest to be like, I can buy into Christianity and get rid of all the bits I don't like. I think it's his intellectual honesty that keeps him away from Christianity to a degree, because he knows it would ask more of him than he's perhaps willing to give. And that's true, I think, for quite a few people. One of the arguments he made on a recent interview podcast where he was talking to Steve Meyer.
Yeah, I saw that.
I found it interesting because he said what Christians aren't doing is they refuse to admit that we know different things now than we used to know. So whether that's Darwinian evolution, etc. And so he said we can't just unknow those things and now accept the historicity of the resurrection. And I did notice, though, that in that discussion, I don't know, did you watch the same discussion?
It was the one with 4 people.
Yeah.
I wish that Maya had have got more of a chance to speak.
But did you notice that they didn't seem to be particularly interested in Meyer saying, no, we do have an answer for that, right? He would continually bring up these sort of scientific arguments for why Christianity can't be true. And Meyer's like, no, like over here, I wrote a book. And they would sort of move on. And so I do sense the sort of closed off attitude towards exploring the idea that maybe all of the evidence hasn't been trending in one direction.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Would you like this beautiful, very high quality, definitely not made in China, not that there's anything wrong with that, Pints with Aquinas beer stein for free, sent to your door? Would you also like a copy of The Jill sent to your door 4 times a year? This is the Pints with Aquinas newspaper, by the way. If you do, go to mattfradd.locals.com and become an annual supporter for any amount. We'll send you that stuff for free, and you get a bunch of other free things in return. You'll get more information by going over to mattfradd.locals.com. Thanks.